Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with the Dicey Review, and tonight we're going to be learning how to play Coffee Roaster, a solo game released by Stronghold Games in the US. Now, Coffee Roaster has two different game modes, a single game challenge and then a roast challenge where you play 3 games one after the other. In this video, we're going to be focusing on how to play a single game. So with that, let's get to the table. Coffee Roaster comes with all of the components that you see here, including a double-sided roast board, an overview card, 22 double-sided coffee cards, a double-sided thermostat and roast counter board, a cloth bag, a cup testing board, a score pad. The game also comes with a variety of tokens that you can see organized in the game box. We'll go over these tokens in more detail later. I do want to highlight the box organizer, which helps keep all of the tokens in their correct place. To begin setup, lay out the large roast board in front of you on the table. It's important to note that there are 2 sides of the roast board. There's a side with a single weight, this is the light side, and on the reverse there's a side with 2 weights. This is the standard side. In your first game, it's recommended that you play on the light side of the board. Next, place the thermostat and roast counter board above the roast board. Please note that there's also a standard and a light side for this board as well. For the first game, use the light side. Then place the cup testing board so that it fits into the recess on the right side of the roast board. Next, put the roast marker on space 0 of the roast counter track. Then find the 5 square cup effect tokens, mix them face down, and then place them randomly on the empty square spaces of the roast board that match their shape. Then turn them face up. Next, place the wild flavor token on the empty space in the center of the roast board. Next, put smoke tokens on the thermostat spaces that are highlighted in red. On the standard side, you put 2 and 3 tokens. On the light side, place 1 and 2 respectively. When you're done, it would look like this. Next, you'll need to choose a coffee type from the coffee cards. There are 2 playstyles in this game, a single choice game or a roast challenge where you play 3 different varieties of coffee one after the other. For the purposes of this instructional video, we're going to just play a single choice, meaning 1 game. For the first game, the rules recommend choosing a coffee card of roast level 1, with a beginner difficulty. In our example, we've chosen the Sao Paulo blend. The coffee card will show you which tokens need to be taken out of the box for the current game. Take these tokens out of the box and place them face up in front of you. It's also important to note that on the light side of the roast board, you'll take 1 flavor token of each type from the ones that are lying in front of you and place them in the spaces in the top left of the board. These tokens are automatically available to the player during the following roasting rounds, which we'll detail in a moment. Players are allowed to use them, leave them on their spaces, or put them into the bag at the end of the roasting phase. All of those terms will make more sense as we explain the game rules. Next, place all of the tokens into the cloth bag. The players can place the overview card near the play area if they would find that helpful, and then the players will place the game round marker on the thermostat board depending on how many moisture tokens are in the coffee type. So for instance, the Sao Paulo blend has 3 moisture tokens, so the players would find the round marker space that says 4 and 3, and place the round marker there. This is where the player will begin. And finally, it might be helpful to place the game box nearby to easily access the different tokens during gameplay. In Coffee Roaster, the goal is to create the perfect coffee. In this one-player game, the player has to roast coffee beans and make sure to screen out unpleasant pieces. After repeated processes of roasting the coffee beans, the player is finally faced with cup testing, where the true quality of their blend will be judged. Gameplay in Coffee Roaster is divided into 2 phases. In the first phase, roasting of the coffee beans will take place over several roasting rounds, and each roasting round will follow the same pattern. When a player has completed as many roasting rounds as they wish, or if the game round marker has reached the final space of the track, the cup testing will happen, where the player's coffee roast is judged. Let's look at the roasting phase first. Multiple roasting rounds will take place one after the other throughout a game of Coffee Roaster. And in each roasting round, the same steps are followed. The first step of each roasting round is to increase the temperature on the thermostat. It's important to note that during the very first round of the game, this step is omitted. The number on the thermostat will also indicate how many tokens are drawn from the bag in each round. So in this first round, 8 tokens are drawn from the player's bag. As the thermostat increases throughout the game, more tokens will be drawn each round. It's also important to note that if the thermostat moves to a space with smoke tokens, these smoke tokens will immediately be placed in the bag with the other chips. The next step of each roasting round is to draw tokens out of the bag equal to the number on the thermostat. In our first round example, the number on the thermostat was 8, so the player would mix the tokens thoroughly in the bag and then draw 8 chips out of the bag. Once a player has drawn chips from the bag, the third step of each roasting round is to remove any moisture that's drawn from the bag. Any moisture that's drawn from the bag in any of the roasting phases is immediately put back in the box. And then you move to the fourth step. The fourth step of each roasting round is to use the tokens in your pool for effects if you want to. It's important to note that flavor tokens can be used for either immediate effects or to unlock bonuses at the end of the game. There are some requirements to using flavor tokens in one of these two ways, and we'll go over that in more detail in a moment. Players can also potentially use some coffee bean tokens to unlock certain effects during the round as well. We'll look at that in a moment. After a player has potentially used any tokens that they want to, the player would then complete the roasting step of the roasting round. During the roasting step, coffee beans increase their roast value by 1. So for instance, both of these zeros would become level 1 coffee beans. The player would return those to the box, and then replace them with 2 level 1 coffee beans. Since the roast value in the player's bag has increased by 2, the player would increase the roast counter by 2 to indicate this. It's important to note that the hard bean token would be replaced by a level 0 coffee bean. It's also important to note that flavor tokens, defective beans, smoke tokens, and burn beans are not affected by the roasting step of a roasting round. If a player would have to resolve a roasting step for a level 4 coffee bean, this coffee bean would then be burnt and would be replaced by a burned bean token in the player's bag. This is bad, you want to avoid it if possible. It's also important to note that if the players are in one of the rounds that has a red stripe on the round symbol, this is a red zone on the thermostat, and during the roast step, each bean is increased by 2 levels. So for instance, if this player was in round 10, each of these 1s would become a 3, and this 0 would become a 2. But it's important to note that even if the player is in a red zone, any hard beans still become a 0. They wouldn't increase to level 1. After the roasting step has been done, it's time for the cleanup step of the roasting round. Any unused tokens are gathered up and placed in the black bag for the next round. After each roasting round, the player then has a decision to continue the roasting process by completing another roasting round, or by stopping and moving on to the cup testing phase. In our scenario, the desired value of coffee beans in the coffee cup is 14. Since the roasting level is only at 2, this player would most certainly want to continue roasting their coffee beans. The player can continue to evaluate this and make this decision at the end of each roasting round. If the player decides to complete another roasting round, they would begin the process over, starting at step 1, increasing the thermostat marker. Now that we've looked at a general overview of what a roasting round looks like, let's look in more detail at the different actions that a player can take using their tokens during a roasting round. We'll do that before moving on to the cup testing phase. Let's say, for instance, that we're going into round 2. We would move the round marker to 9, then 9 tokens would be drawn from the bag. First, any moisture that might have been drawn would be removed from the game. Now that that's done, we're left with these tokens that we can potentially use for the round. You can use tokens for immediate effects on the left side of the board, or for flavor effects on the right side of the board that will unlock special in-game bonuses to help with the cup testing phase. Let's look at the immediate effects first. During the round, players can unlock the wild flavor token. To do this, a player would need to place a level 0 bean and a level 1 bean in the 2 spaces provided. Once a player does this, the flavor token would immediately be unlocked. The flavor token could be used in the same round, or it could be saved for later rounds by placing it back in the bag during the cleanup step. It's important to note that these coffee beans can be placed here in the same round or over the course of multiple rounds. It's also important to note that once any token or flavor token is placed on these spaces, they're there for the rest of the game. If a player wants to use one of the flavor tokens to unlock an immediate effect, they have to place a flavor token of the color matching the space. So for instance, they would have to place a red flavor token here or a blue flavor token here. If the space shows all 3 colors, they could use a flavor token of any color. It's also important to note that a player could use the wild flavor token to activate any of these spaces. If a player activates the 2 additional tokens space, they would immediately draw 2 more tokens from the bag and add them to the pool of already drawn tokens. It's important to note that if there are less than 2 tokens in the bag, this effect can't be activated. And if a player draws a moisture token as part of this effect, it's simply removed immediately and a replacement token is not drawn. If a player activates the 2 new tokens space, they could immediately select 2 of the tokens that they'd previously drawn for the round, put them back into the bag, and draw 2 new tokens. Once again, if a player draws moisture tokens as part of this action, it's simply removed and they don't draw a replacement for it. If a player activates the 2 out of 5 immediate action, the player would draw 5 additional tokens out of the bag. They would then remove 2 of these 5 tokens from the game. The 3 remaining tokens would be placed back into the bag. It's important to note that with this action, you can remove any type of tokens from the game, and you have to remove 2 tokens. You can't choose to remove 1 or no tokens. It's also important to note that if there are less than 5 tokens in the cloth bag, this effect can't be used, and moisture tokens are removed immediately, and you don't draw any replacement tokens for them. And finally, if a player were to activate the removal action, they would get to remove any burned beans, smoke, or defective beans from their pool of tokens from the game. It's also important to note that there's a specific order to activating immediate or flavor token effects in the game. You always have to activate immediate effects first. So for instance, if during the round you placed a token here to activate one of the flavor effects and work on unlocking this token, you wouldn't be able to take any immediate actions after activating a flavor effect. You have to activate any immediate effects that you want to use first, and then you can use flavor effects. You're also free to just use flavor effects if you want to. Now that we've looked at all of the immediate effects, let's look at using tokens for flavor effects and how to unlock in-game bonuses. When players place flavor tokens in these spaces, they have to resolve the token's flavor effect ability. We'll look at those in just a second. In addition to using the flavor effect of the token that they place here, placing tokens in these 2 spaces will unlock this cup effect token, which will give the players advantages during the cup testing phase for in-game scoring. Let's first look at what each of the flavor effects do when placed here. To place a flavor token on these spaces, you have to be able to activate and complete the flavor token's action. Each of the flavor tokens triggers a different action during the round. It's also important to note that you have to place a flavor token that matches the color of the space where it's being placed. Any spaces that show all 3 colors can have any flavor token placed there, but if you place a particular color of flavor token, you have to activate that color's action. Once a player has placed both flavor tokens and activated their action on a single line, the corresponding cup effect token is immediately unlocked and placed on the corresponding space in the coffee cup for the end of the game. It's also important to note that one of the tokens goes on this space at the bottom of the board. If a player places a red flavor token, they have to activate the concentration action. This action tells a player to combine 2 bean tokens to create 1 bean token of a higher value. So for instance, the players could take these 2 tokens and combine them to make a bean with a value of 3. It's important to note that the bean is immediately placed into the bag and isn't roasted during this roasting round's roasting step. It's also important to note that this action can only be used on beans with a value of 1, 2, or 3. So for instance, players couldn't combine a level 0 bean with a level 4 bean to skip a roasting phase. If a player were to place a green flavor token, they would take the preservation action. This would allow players to take 2 bean tokens and put them back into the cloth bag unroasted. With this action, you can prevent things like a token with a value of 4 being over-roasted. It's important to note that hard beans, defective beans, or burned beans can't be preserved, but any other bean value can be preserved, even level 0 beans. If a player activates the blue flavor token, they take the dispersion action. This action allows a player to remove 1 bean token from the game and put it back into the box. In return, the player can take 2 bean tokens out of the box, with roast levels that add up in total to the bean that was discarded. So for instance, since we discarded a level 4 bean, the players could take this level 3 and level 1 bean and put them into the bag, or they could take these 2 level 2 beans. This action can only be taken with beans of a level 2, 3, or 4. Now that we've looked at all of the actions that you can take during the roasting phase and all of the steps of the roasting phase, let's look at the second phase of the game, the cup testing. When a player has decided to stop taking roasting phases, or if they've reached the last space on the thermometer track, they go through phase 2, cup testing. During cup testing, players are trying to get the perfect value to achieve the highest score possible. So for instance, with the Sao Paulo blend, this player is trying to get 14 value worth of beans in their cup. In addition to gaining the perfect value, the player is trying to get these flavor tokens in their cup as well. This will give them additional bonuses. You can also earn additional bonuses for having beans of the same value in the cup during the cup testing scoring, and we'll look at that in a moment. During the cup testing phase, the player will draw tokens out of the bag one at a time, and they'll decide whether or not they want to place this token in their cup or discard this token to the tray. Players can continue to put tokens into the cardboard tray until all 4 of the spaces are filled. If all 4 of the spaces are filled in the cardboard tray, every token drawn has to be placed into the cup. Players will continue to draw tokens out of the bag one at a time and place them either in the cup or in the cardboard tray until the cup is completely filled or until the bag is empty. And it's important to note that placing the tokens into the cup is done from left to right and top to bottom. It's important to note that if any moisture tokens are drawn, they're simply immediately removed from the game. It's also important to note that only 1 token can be placed on each space. Once all of the spaces in the cup are filled, the player will then move on to the cup scoring phase. During cup scoring, a few things are checked. First, the roast value is checked. The roast value is equal to the value of all of the coffee beans in the cup. The perfect roast value in our example scenario is 14. In our example, we've achieved a value of 13 coffee beans in the cup. A value of 13 would give us 6 points for this scenario. The player would indicate this by writing it in the first space of the score pad. Then, the player would check to see how many of the flavor tokens they had matched up in the cup. In our example, the player has a wild token, which can be any color, a blue token, and a green token. In this instance, the wild token can count as a blue, this can count as another blue, and finally a green, matching all 3 flavor tokens. If a player matches 1 flavor token, they gain 1 extra point. If they match 2, they gain 3 points, and if they match 3, they gain 6 points. It's important to note that there are some scenarios with 4 flavor tokens. If a player is able to match a 4th flavor token, they would gain 10 additional points. In our example, with our 3 matched tokens, we would gain 6 points, which we can indicate once again by writing 6 in the score pad. Finally, players would receive a bonus if they've used 3 or more of the same value bean. These are known as skill points. If a player has matched 3 of the same value, they would gain an extra point. If they've matched 4 of the same value, they would gain 2 extra points. If a player manages to match 5, 6, or 7 of the same value bean in their cup, they would get 3, 4, or 5 points respectively. In our example, we would gain 1 additional point for these 3 beans of level 3. We would indicate this on our score pad. And finally, the players would receive negative points if a few different things happen. For any beans with red X's on them, the players would receive negative points. For smoke tokens, they would receive 1 negative point. For overburned beans, they would receive 1 point. For defective beans, they would receive 2 negative points. And for a hard bean, they would receive 1 negative point as well. In our example, we have 1 smoke token for a total of 1 negative point. It's also important to note that if any spaces of the cup remain empty, the player would receive 5 negative points. After totaling all of our scores together, we would end this game with a score of 12. The last thing to discuss are cup effects. These cup effect tokens will allow players to have special abilities during the cup testing phase and during scoring. The cardboard tray token is placed on the existing space down at the bottom of the roast board. If this space is unlocked, it gives players extra spaces to discard unwanted tiles when drawing during the cup testing phase. So for instance, after filling these 4 spaces, the player would then have these additional spaces to continue discarding tiles if they wish. The extra bean token is placed on the first space in the cup board. This space counts as being occupied by a level 3 bean and can't be filled by any of the beans drawn from the bag during the cup testing phase. It's included in scoring as if it were a bean of a level 3. The sweetness token is placed on the space designated in the cup. This space is considered to be occupied and can't be filled during the cup testing phase, as with the extra bean token. Some cards require the sweetness token for obtaining flavor points, but for all other coffee cards, this sweetness token acts as if it's a wild flavor token. The selection token is placed on this space in the cup on the second row of empty spaces. This token only affects the spaces to the left of where the token is placed, so just these two spaces on this second row. If this token is present in the cup, when drawing for these two spaces, the player would draw two tokens out of the bag, decide which one to place in the cup, and then the other token would be placed back into the cloth bag. After making this decision, and then drawing for these spaces, this token's effect would no longer apply. And finally, the exchange token is placed on this space in the designated spot on the cup. This token's effect doesn't have to be used, but if the player chooses to use this effect, it has to be executed in the following way. The player would first choose any two tokens in the cup to remove. These tokens would be placed back into the cloth bag. Then, mix the contents of the bag thoroughly and draw 3 new tokens from the bag. From the 3 new tokens drawn, select 2 of those tokens to put back into the cup. In this way, players might be able to change a bad cup into a very good cup scoring. This is everything you need to know to play a basic game of Coffee Roaster. There are also rules that detail how to play a roast challenge, playing 3 games after the other. Once you've mastered the basics, you can take on this challenge for even more depth. Alright everybody, that was our video. We hope that it was helpful and we hope that it was informative. And if you still have any questions about how to play the game, please comment below or email us directly at thedicey@gmail.com. If you want to read our written reviews, you can check out thedicey.review.com and make sure and connect with us on social media or at our Board Game Geek Guild. Now, if you want to see how this game plays in real time with all of the different rounds and actions one after the other, we do have some live streamed gameplays on the channel already, and we are planning on playing this game again on the channel so that you can see us play it and see all of the different rounds and how a game would fully resolve. So make sure and check back for that as well. But until next time, we'll see you at the table.